She's talking to somebody else.
I'm here as well, Senator.
Okay, Senator and Representative Ryan, we are live on YouTube.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we want to thank the contracting board for being with us today. Like we just talked about, you did send us a great deal of material. I know from our notes that you had looked forward to getting change in the budget insofar as some additional personnel, which I know has been something you've been trying to do for a number of years. Is there anything you want to add to what you have told us previously, or what you, or refer to anything in the materials that you did send us?
Yes, I'm off mute, correct? Okay.
Yes,
Yes,
you are.
thank you, Representative Ryan and senators and representatives. My name's Larry Fox and I chair the board. There are just a few things, and then if you have questions, but there are a few things I did want to say. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the other members of the board that are on this Zoom: Al Bertolini, Bruce Buff, Lauren Gauthier, Al Ilg, Bob Rinker, our executive director David Gay, and our intern from the University of Connecticut Graduate School, Jolena Nano. Were it not for the board members that are so active, I'm not sure we would be able to do very much of anything. Just quickly, when we had our hearing back in February, I made a misstatement to the Appropriations Committee in response to a question from one of the representatives on approps. They asked me if DAS has a chief procurement officer, and I said yes. And actually, that answer is incorrect. DAS has a director of procurement with responsibilities for overseeing their procurement unit, but that position does not in any way resemble the responsibilities laid out in section 4E-2 of the statutes for the chief procurement officer. It's an important distinction, and we gave, I think in the materials we included that portion of the statute 4E-2 for you to look at. But just as an example, under the statute, while we generally don't have very much authority over quasi-publics, the chief procurement officer specifically has monitoring authority over the procurement policies of quasi-publics. It's just an example of what having that position vacant means. It's in the statute. It's a very important position, and it's been unfunded since I think it was 2017, David.
That's correct.
When Julia left it. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say, and then I'll just will be available for questions, is that our one paid staff member, David Gay, our executive director, is planning on retiring in April of 2022. And if we do not address the staffing issues of the board in this legislative session, we will lose the opportunity to have David pass on his institutional knowledge and experience. I actually fear, and I don't think it's hyperbole, that we'll effectively lose the board because he carries with him so much knowledge and experience, and we need him to be able to begin to pass that on to other people. So this, as you all know from the newspapers, there have been a number of issues we've uncovered, but there's just a lot of work to do in Connecticut around contracting and procurement, and we need more resources to be able to do the job effectively. We included in the background package, a packet, I asked David to go through all the things this board is supposed to do. I know we're supposed to come up here and brag about everything we've done. I asked him to go through it and just list for you all the things that you have asked the board to do that we actually don't do, as well as some of the things we do. So that's available for you, and we'll take any questions that you have.
I have the list of the positions that you're looking to have funded in this budget. That was some of the information you sent us on your fact sheet. The senator was talking about work you wanted to do with the Port Authority. Do you want to expound on that a little bit?
Well, for sure. I mean, as you know, we received complaints from some individuals down in the New London area back in November, and on the basis of those complaints, we began to do an investigation. As you know, problems at the Port Authority go back to 2018, and the governor stepped in and had OPM and DAS do a number of things to try to rectify that, including a new chief of the chair of the Port Authority, including a new executive director, including consultants to look at all of their practices. It's interesting to me, and it should be interesting to you too, that despite the intervention of DAS and OPM and a lot of work that they did do to clean up how they were doing bookkeeping and a number of things, when we looked at it, we assigned different aspects of it to different board members. Bruce Buff and Lauren Gauthier and our intern Jolene were part of that committee along with me. We looked at it very briefly, and among the things we noticed right away is, oh my goodness, they have some language in the statute that really limits our authority, even more so than what's in language in for other quasi-publics. And so we asked the Attorney General for a formal opinion. And the reason we asked him for that opinion is because we, with a very cursory look at them, found some very disturbing things. So, for example, we found that back in 2018, right after one of their board members left the board, that board member became part of another organization, Seabury, that didn't exist, by the way, a month before that. They ended up doing a contract with Gateway to run the state pier, but we saw something which was unusual to us. This success fee. They were paid $20,000 a month to help find an operator for the port, plus expenses. That seems okay, but then they were paid an additional $500,000 for finding the person, called a success fee. And frankly, that seems unusual to us. But to look more deeply into it, we were concerned about whether we had the authority to look at it. When we were looking at the actual concession agreement, I think Lauren can correct me, I think it's about a 16-page document. 14 pages were redacted. So we actually can't tell very much about what's in that agreement. Now, again, under the statutes, we have the authority, even on confidential and proprietary information, under the statutes, if it's a contracting agency, we have the authority to see everything, and we frequently do. We hold it in a very confidential way, of course, but before we started pressing about seeing stuff that was redacted, we said, well, we need to check with the Attorney General to see if we have authority. So that's a problem, and we've been testifying about these issues, and we've notified the legislature that we actually think. Let me state first, I as a citizen, I understand the need for quasi-publics in a lot of areas. They bring a focus and so forth. But I actually never thought that it was an excuse to play fast and loose with taxpayer dollars. And the State Contracting Standards Board is the watchdog that the legislature has set up for the taxpayers of this state. And it's interesting to me that neither OPM or DAS really focus on that Seabury issue. And that's the difference between, I think, what this board can do and needs to do as a watchdog and what other agencies may do, which is to try to clean things up and just move on. And so we would like to look more deeply into it. We frankly, if we had a chief procurement officer, even if we don't expand the quasi-public language, which to cover us, the chief procurement officer specifically has some authority. But to really have authority, we need to change the language, and then we would like to go deeper into what's going on there to make sure that there's transparency and accountability. It's a long answer, I apologize.
I think we needed to hear all that. That was good. Okay, so I'm looking with this. These 5 people, including the chief procurement officer, until we passed the budget, you couldn't really begin doing anything until, I mean, what would be your time frame if we were able to get this into the budget and the budget passed? And the budget goes into effect July 1st. So when would you be able to begin to use these people?
Well, we begin to use them right away. But let me just say, if the legislature changes the language in the statutes, you know, like Bruce Buff on our board is a retired high-level procurement person. We have board members. Basically, what we did to try to be a watchdog without the staff is we have working committees of board members that conduct this work. So if we had the authority if you change the authority on the quasi-publics, then our board members would immediately begin to look at this stuff more deeply. Without that, the formal, by the way, I appreciate what the Attorney General did, because we can't afford we have to act in our authority. We have to follow the law. We're asking everyone else to follow the law. We have to follow the law ourselves. But if we get the authority from the legislature, we won't wait for these positions. It's just that basically we're relying on a volunteer board to do the work. And in some cases, we really ought to have a chief procurement officer, and that brings it specific statutory stuff. So we would move to fill them right away. I would just add on that, when the board was initially conceived by the legislature back in 2009, the initial budget request that was talked about was $700,000 a year. And that was in those dollars. I don't know what it would be today, but our request is actually less than what the initial request was. But there is all kinds of we need that chief. You need that chief procurement officer. The public needs that person. There's no one watching the house on a professional basis that way. The research analyst and the accounts examiner are because there's all kind of we do audits. The one thing that we've done, and our board does them, is every 3 years. Every year, we take 1/3 of all the contracting agencies and do an audit of their procurement practices. Now and by the way, we gave you a summary of that in the materials. There is a lot of work to be done that the agencies know they need to do, or in some cases they don't know, but we should tell them about how they're conducting their procurement. We can observe it we can see the gap between what they're able to do and what they should be doing, but we don't. And the research analysis and accounts examiner would help with that. The also DAS is now moving to a much more robust system for posting and analyzing, and so is OPM. We need someone on our staff to help us be able to look at that and examine that. And we need an attorney. Frankly, if you look at the materials we sent to you, there are all kinds of regulations, as an example, that we should be adopting. Another thing, the chief procurement officer is supposed to chair an advisory board of businesses in the state to ask them what they think our procurement practice should be. If we can't contract with the attorney general to give us all the legal support that we actually need. And I don't think any of our board members are attorneys. And so we get help from the AG when we ask for it. But we have an incredible amount of work in terms of drafting regulations and so forth that needs to be done. That's in the statute that should have been done years ago that we never had the staff to do. So we would get going on those things when the staff came up. But on things like the complaints that we have on procurement practices, if we have the authority on the quasi-publics, we'll go into it. We won't actually wait. We'll try to go into it with the activism of our board.
We appreciate all the work your volunteers have done over the years. We know you've done an incredible amount since you haven't had the staff. Since we're the money committee and we were just looking at the financial aspects, funding your board, the proposals that you're putting forward to make the changes that will enable you to do this sooner, is that legislation? I think the senator was saying something earlier. Has that legislation been introduced, and what committee is it on to ensure that is good? Do you have any idea?
There's a couple of different bills. I think they're all over at GAE now.
Okay.
I think that's where they didn't necessarily start there, but I think that's where they are now.
Okay, so they're in the process, so that's good. Senator
One bit.
Austin,
I'm sorry. One bill is,
Senator Austin, did you want to ask the question?
no, I just wanted to say one bill is in GAE and one bill is in transportation, because the Port Authority is had the cognizance of that. Quasi-public is in transportation. The language that was sent in on the AG's point was sent over there. And I also got some information from the auditors that they wanted to see changed that would allow them to do more succinct auditing of the quasi-publics. And I sent the same information over to GAE, to the chairs and vice chairs of both transportation and GAE. What is the total dollar amount that you're looking for, Larry?
In fiscal year 22, it's a total would be I know David, if I get this wrong, correct me. About $435,000 for fiscal year 2022 is the addition. Is that the additional amount, David?
The total request would be, if I may.
Oh, I see it now. It's
626,000. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
626 is the total. That includes the executive director that's currently filled. And in 2023, that would go up by another $12,000 to $638,000.
That's
Thank you
because in
very
that year, there's an extra pay period. There's a 27th pay period.
Which you explained that in your notes. Senator, did you have your hand up? Do you have another question, or? Senator Austin, you have your hand up. Did you have another question or comment? Or?
No, that was from what I just said.
Okay. Representative Nolan.
Good afternoon. My two questions were actually answered because I was going to inquire in regards to the amount of money that would be needed, and you just stated that. And then the other thing was in regards to how quickly that overseeing would be able to start in regards to making sure that we have some action versus just discussion in regards to it. And you kind of answered that also, but I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit on any requirements that we can help with other than the things that you sent to us.
Oh, wow. That's a nice invitation. And I'd love to give it more thought. I mean, the only other, I mean, we clearly need, in terms of the quasi-publics, this legislature needs to clarify its intent with respect to the board's authority. I would say there is another bill that's been introduced, Senate Bill 920, which actually moves in the opposite direction, and it's under the title of public-private partnerships, but it goes way beyond that, and it basically explicitly takes the State Contracting Standards Board out of any public-private partnership agreement, and it expands in an almost unlimited way the number of public-private partnerships that could exist in the state, and it reduces the amount of oversight that the legislature would have from what's currently in the statute. We actually think in its current form, we actually think it would significantly weaken accountability in our state at the same time that it's expanding the amount of public-private partnerships, which might be a good thing, by the way. We don't have a judgment about that, but we do have a judgment about not having accountability for it. Right. Because it's taxpayer money. It actually reduces the amount in the current language. Part of the definition, it says that the state has a ceiling on what percentage it can actually put into the partnership. It has to be, I believe, David, it's 75% private money, 25% state money. This takes that away, so that in fact, the state could put in whatever amount. Private sector put in even just a little. It expands the number of agencies that would be eligible to every single agency in the state, whereas before it was mostly about the Department of Transportation and a few other agencies. Now it's any agency in the state can do these things, and it explicitly writes out the board from having anything to do with it. So that's I don't know where that is, but that would actually move in the opposite direction from what we think is important.
Right. Well, we thank you for all your work and look forward to some big changes so that we can get a hold of the things that we need to get a hold of. So I appreciate you and your team. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you. Representative Doffen, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you for your, I'm going between two meetings, so just listening halfway here. So apologies. Just following up with Rep. Nolan's question, which was a great one. In terms of this SB 20, do you think it was a response to the Dalio Foundation and the issues that we had around that?
I don't know. I don't think so. But I don't know. What I do think it might be, and I don't really know, but I know that there is going to be, just as we're going to lose David Gay next April, there's going to be a lot of exit of state employees next April, and I believe that will probably mean the state is going to at least look at whether it wants to contract out more of the work, and I think we have to be careful about making sure that we don't weaken. For example, one of the things that SB 920 does is it takes out. Since it takes out the board, one of the things that the board had in the old language is it had a responsibility to take a look at whether something that's being contemplated being contracted out is a core government service. And the bar is higher if in fact it is a core government service. That's gone. That kind of language is eliminated, and I think that's, as a taxpayer of the state, I don't know that we've answered the question, what are the services that the state actually needs to do as a state? I mean, I wouldn't like to see us contract out prisons. I mean, just to take an example,
Yeah.
or public safety.
So
And
the interesting thing, this is a transportation bill. So I
but
think
it goes way beyond transportation now. In fact, in the hearing, the public hearing, which I attended, when they asked the deputy commissioner about the aspects of the bill, one of the representatives asked a good question. They said, well, tell us what the impact is beyond transportation projects. And he said, I really don't know anything about that. I can tell you about transportation, but I can't comment on anything beyond it. And we don't know. Nobody knows.
yeah. Okay, I'm gonna dig into that bill and let's look at some of the public hearing around it, because I don't sit on transportation, so I wasn't familiar with it, but I think it was an interesting thing. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you, Representative. We only have a couple of minutes left. Mr. Fox, is there anything related to your budget? Any other comments you want to make before we end today related to your funding? Other than what you've already told us.
Just that, you know, we have I think that the existence of this board is in a natural tension with OPM and DAS, and because in a sense they think we don't need the board, and the legislature says, well, we should have a watchdog. We've come up with a number of experiences where we think that's true, but we know that in the last budget cycle, the Appropriations Committee and the legislature thought we should have some staffing, and in the final negotiations, it was lost. And you know, I don't think we're going to have a kumbaya moment with the OPM and DAS about funding us. I think it's going to require the legislature insisting on it.
I think I just confused the issue. I think what you said, you know, obviously work needs to be done.
Representative Ryan, are you on mute?
Requires a committee to look to be able to.
Yes, I sound better when I'm on mute. Yes, I was just thanking you for coming in today, and we appreciate your comments, and we'll certainly keep in mind your last comments that you made. And I guess Senator Anwar, did you have any? No, I guess not. He lit up there for a second. I thought he might want a question or a comment. Okay, because we do have another department coming in at 2:30, but we thank you. And
Thank
we'll
you
switch
very
over
much.
to the next meeting. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Chris, do you switch us over?
Secretary of State's office is coming right in, Representative Ryan.
Well, their documents now.
Ryan, I see, looks like Scott Bates from Secretary of State's office. I'm not sure who else is here from there. Maybe if Scott can, Thomas, looks like Thomas Miano, maybe from Secretary of State.
Right.
Yes.
So Secretary Merrill is over in GAE right now. I think that's ongoing. So I'll be filling in until she can break free. And we have Tom Miano, who is our Director of IT. We have Sonia Mathis, who is with our MSS unit, which is our fiscal unit. And think Ted Bromley, our elections director, is also over in GAE, unfortunately, and we may have Chris Drake, who is our business services director. But we're prepared to move forward when you are.
Okay. Well, Mr. Bates, I guess you're better than nothing. So
Nah.
we can certainly start with you.
Yes, sir.
I'm glad to have you here today. And we've
Thank
got
you.
some documentations from your office concerning some of the issues with the budget. Are there any comments that you would like to make on behalf of the Secretary of State's office regarding, I think the issue here mostly was cybersecurity and the personnel you've hired for that purpose. Any introductory comments you'd like to make to us before we get started here?
Sure. Thank you, Representative. And yeah, thanks for the support over these years. It allowed us to to have a successful election in 2020, along with some of the federal support. We learned a couple important lessons coming out of the 2020 elections and things that none of us could actually imagine even 4 years ago. And those are the things that we put forward for your consideration for additional funding. One is what we call an election information security analyst. This is the equivalent of an IT3 position. And we did that with federal funding this past election. And that person, and states like California and Colorado have done this as well. That position in particular is helpful in going on the dark web and other locations to make sure that misinformation about the election process is not being put out there. And so that goes right into the next piece, which we're talking about, which is a public information campaign. And we were able to conduct a public information campaign this past election cycle with a combination of federal funding and a nonprofit grant that could talk with people about how to register, how to vote, the absentee ballot process, how to vote in time of pandemic. And actually, we saw that the rate of, for example, absentee ballot rejections was cut in half. And we think that that is likely because of the engagement. So both of these things go to the main point, sir, which is that we think we need more engagement with the public, and we have to keep up with any malicious actors that might be out there trying to present false information about the election process itself. Thank you. We're open to any questions.
Now, considering this is a, I keep on checking, make sure I'm not on mute. Considering this is not a statewide election this year, for the upcoming year, do you see yourselves as having just as vibrant or program for what would essentially be a municipal election year? Would you be doing the same things this year as you did last year for the elections?
Yeah, it's a great point. That's why, in particular, we did not continue the election information security analyst position right now, but we definitely see the need for it in the 2020 statewide election. And so it's going to be important to have that person, in the process. There's the hiring process. You go through DAS and all of that. It takes time, train somebody up, get them familiar with the election process here in Connecticut. So we want to be ready for the 2020 election cycle. And more we see that the kind of activities from malicious foreign actors are ongoing. They don't stop when the election cycle stops. So we want to be as prepared as we can be. As for the public information campaign, a really effective one, and I think we're putting forward a suggestion of $500,000 on an annual basis here. And that's because it takes a lot to do a statewide public information effort. We've presented some information to the committee for your review. $500,000 a year gets you a good digital campaign in both English and Spanish. It's pretty good outreach, but what we did in this past election cycle was 2.7 million total, and that was pretty good saturation. So if we have a funding stream that's continual, we can keep engaged on the issue and pop up if there are issues, let's say with the municipals, if there is misinformation out there, we'd be able to act on it.
So from what you just said, are you saying that the person that you used during the last election is no longer employed and you'd have to start from scratch and hire somebody new after we give you this funding?
Yep, that's correct. That's right.
Okay. That's a shame. You lose that experience. All right. Am I
Yeah.
co-chair? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
No, I was just, that was my comment. Did you want to say something? Okay, Senator, my co-chair, Senator Anwar is here with us, and I think he has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry for being a little late. I was chairing another committee meeting. I could not get out of it. It just had to be a little late, so I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Bates, for your update. And I just wanted to, there are a few bills that we have which are hopefully going to improve our voter turnout. Is there going to result in an increase in the cost and budget for the Secretary of State's office?
It's a great question. I would say when it comes to if there were an expansion of the absentee ballot system, it all depends on what support we're going to be able to provide to localities. So for example, in this past election cycle, we were able to provide about $2.5 million in direct assistance to localities, to all 169 municipalities, to make sure that they could handle the COVID situation, first of all, with cleaning and personnel, but also the absentee ballot process itself. We put funds into sending applications out statewide. So the question would be if that's part of an ongoing program, that's a certain cost. And also we paid for postage because we thought it was important that voters in Connecticut didn't have to pay for the right to vote. So those are expenses, they're ongoing, but we handled it certainly in 2020, and we could provide those estimates for this committee and other committees of cognizance.
Thank you. The other question I wanted to ask you was, see, some of these cyber attacks that are happening from out of the country, is the federal government providing funding directly to the state to help our Secretary of State's office around the integrity issues?
Yes, sir. So we've had a close partnership since 2017 with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. They actually have personnel here that we work with that know Connecticut. They partner with the BEST unit as well for the statewide enterprise, cyber enterprise. And, we need the partnership, state, local, and federal. We put a lot of resources into upgrading the town networks, into training, into online training for all registrars and clerks. So, but yes, we have a good partnership with the federal government, with CISA, which Chris Krebs used to run, you may know from the news. CISA is within DHS, to throw a bunch of acronyms around, but they focus on critical infrastructure, which elections are now part of critical infrastructure. So there's ongoing funding from the federal government to the state larger enterprise on security grants for cyber. Yeah, there's great information sharing, and we have no complaints about that. They've been great partners.
And another question is, I have a little bit of bias as I ask this question. The voter turnout is different in different parts of our state. Is there an educational campaign that is focused on reaching out to the people? Because if somebody is working as an essential worker, they do not have the luxury to take time off. They're not given the time off. And that is resulting in those individuals, despite being socially responsible, are unable to do this. Of course, some of the laws will be able to adjust it, but the outreach of turnout, how does that work out? And if we are lagging behind in some parts, is there areas of opportunity to focus?
Yep, always areas of opportunity. Even though we had record voter turnout this past election cycle, and we had about 35%, I think, 33% minimum, I can't remember, but it was a huge amount of folks voting by absentee. I think that helped with the turnout rates, certainly in the pandemic time. And people, as you're mentioning, who work 2 jobs and have a hard time having to go stand in line for 15 minutes or half an hour for an election day. So in terms of outreach, that goes directly to the public information campaign. We were able with $2.7 million to do TV ads. We had saturation around the state for a good couple of weeks and felt confident that we were reaching a lot of different communities. We made special outreach to Spanish-speaking communities. We had campaigns going on in urban areas. So it was radio, social media, TV, newspapers in the African-American community, Spanish-speaking newspapers. So we kind of did our best. It's like any of these campaigns, you can always do more. And yeah, I think that's going to have to be part, certainly at least as long as Secretary Merrill is in this office, that'll be a priority of hers, is to make sure that any public information campaign takes into account making sure we get information to underserved communities.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your team and everybody who works so hard for our state and integrity of our different responsibilities that your office has. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Bates, let me ask a question kind of keying off what the Senator just asked you. When you have these education programs, are you allowed, when you use federal dollars or for that matter, state dollars, like some towns in the state did pretty good with their turnout, while others did not do as well. Are you allowed to target those towns that didn't do as well to give them more of a concentration in voter education? Or does it have to be kind of a broad-based, spread across the state evenly type of funding for those kind of programs?
Yeah, this particular campaign was demographic and it was statewide. So we did not do that kind of specific targeting. Is it allowable? I'm not sure. But I think that the more people that feel vested in knowing that we're getting the same information to everybody, that's what we can do. So I'm happy to do some research on that, see if there are any prohibitions that would keep us from targeting a specific area. But I think just from a public policy standpoint, at least in the 2020 election cycle, our approach was let's try to cover statewide, and let's also make sure we're hitting communities like Spanish speaking that may be missed by traditional media campaign, or there were some urban newspapers that we hit because those reach other segments of the population. But TV is ideal because it's pretty broad-based, and the social media also can be pretty broad-based and geographic in that sense. So yes, there are the tools of targeting that exist, but we tried to be as broad-based as possible. And we did provide some information on the campaign that was conducted in 2020 to the committee, but we can provide even more detail into the specific audiences that were reached.
Thank you. Representative Zawistowski, I believe you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here on short notice, Mr. Bates. The campaigns to help voter turnout are a positive thing. It's good to have people show up at the polls. This is a fair amount of money. I want to find out. My concern is how the money, excuse me, money is being spent. Who actually makes the ultimate decisions on where these dollars go for outreach?
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned about turnout. It's not really that. I would say these public information campaigns are about voting itself and the process itself, because especially in 2020, so many questions about absentee voting, because it's not an easy process. I had to look twice myself to make sure that I got it right. And so I think of it in terms of getting the right information to the public about the process of voting. It's not like saying, hey, everybody, let's get out and vote. I mean, I love that, but so there's that. The ultimate decision rests with the secretary. We had advice from a professional advertising firm that does work with the state, and some of the people that were on this call and others reviewed that ad campaign, basically that public information campaign. And
The-
we also used, you know, data on what were effective messages in terms of making the messages understandable, because it's so difficult when you're trying to convey a lot of information in a short amount of time.
This advertising firm that you said does work with the state, is this something that's included in your budget?
No, no. So, I mean, that would have to be a bid out, a new kind of bid out, I would assume, right? And so that would be a process that, like any other RFP.
And do you anticipate to have as many difficulties trying to communicate any changes in balloting for this fall? This is a whole different ballgame, assuming that the pandemic is over by that time. I don't think we're going to have the reliance on the mail-in ballots the way that we did this past year when it was a necessity. Do you anticipate that, you know, that the same amount of money is going to be spent?
Well, it was 2.7 million for the public information campaign in 2020. So I'd say no, that the smaller amount reflects that we wouldn't need that amount. But I would say it's so important now to be prepared, because we have this element secretaries, Republican and Democrat across the country are facing, which we didn't have 4 years ago, which is there are malicious actors that actively are trying to spread misinformation. So we have to stay ahead of that by being able to provide affirmatively the information. And if there is a spate of misinformation that comes out, and I'll use an example which is in the public realm. There was a website that said, you know, register to vote here. Well, it was a dead link, and people thought they're registering to vote. This is in another state. This was put up by a foreign actor. And it's those kind of things that we want, if they're found out, that we want to knock down. And so if there were something that, you know, you'd think it wouldn't touch your town, but I think the people in that jurisdiction didn't think it would either. And foreign actors are busy trying to make sure, and this is separate and apart from turning ourselves on each other, which is a whole nother topic. This is the simple nuts and bolts of where do I go to vote? When's election day? How do I vote? And so it's that information that is so important to convey.
The 2.7 million that was spent in 2020, how much of that came from the federal government?
That was 600,000 from the federal government and 2.1 million from a nonprofit, which is I think it was the Center for Election Integrity and Reform. And I think like every state in the country got funding from that entity and could use it for public information purposes.
Okay, I'm also a little concerned. One of the reasons I brought this up as far as trying to find out who has ultimate authority on what goes out. The Secretary of State's office during 2020, and this comes from one of my first selectmen. This is nothing that I need direct contact with. The office sent out election safety posters, and the first selectman waved it on Zoom saying, hey, we're getting these posters. It cost over $8 to ship them to each of the town halls, and all the town halls are closed. Why are we wasting this money? That is one of the reasons behind my asking. And, you know, I didn't have any answers for her. And also the other thing is, I mean, in past years, we've had billboards about voting that has had Secretary Merrill's face on them, which people found upsetting because they felt it was campaign related. So I just want to know what the accountability is, and to make sure that things like this don't occur in the future.
Sure. So as to those posters, we actually turned them into digital ads as well and sent them out by social media to hundreds of thousands of people. And I think that those posters were probably put together before the pandemic and were sent anyway, and not every town hall was closed throughout the election cycle. But I take your point, and I think we were trying to do as much as we could with what we had in terms of how the accountability, ultimately the accountability is with our office and the Secretary of the State. And I didn't hear any concerns about how we use those funds in 2020, but to your point,
That's because
ultimately-
they contact the reps.
yeah, they
Uh,
contacted everybody, believe me, ask the poor town clerks, right?
Yeah, that's true.
It
That's
was a
true.
challenge. And we noticed, I defer to the town clerks, but they were absolutely inundated
Mhm.
and kind of concerned about the number of calls they had to field. I'd say until about 3 weeks out, when our advertising was kicking into high gear. It didn't eliminate the calls, but I think it decreased it. At least that's the feedback that we got.
Yeah, and the town clerks were not happy with the process, and I'm sure that message has come through loud and clear to you as well. I have 3 towns, and I heard from all of them. But anyway, I thank you for your work and for being here today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Do we have any other questions from members of the committee? Do we have any additional comments that you'd like to make, Mr. Bates, before you end today concerning your budget?
No, thank you for your support, your ongoing support. We have a great team. Everybody stepped up, as I know it happened in every agency and in your chambers as well. But the people on this call today from our office just went above and beyond. And it was the honor of a lifetime for all of us to work on the 2020 elections. And thank you for your support.
Well, thank you, sir. I believe that is the work of the committee for today. Chris, am I right about that?
That's correct, Representative.
And so our next, we'll have a meeting. I don't think it's been scheduled yet. We'll actually have a subcommittee internal workshop where we'll go over the budget and finalize our final recommendations. And I'm right, we don't have a date yet for that, do we, Chris? Or do we?
I'm gonna check with Sue. If we have a date, it'll probably be next week, but after this meeting, I'll check with Sue and we'll send something out soon.
Yeah, I thought I had, I think there might actually be a date that we set aside, but I don't have it right in front of me either. Okay, well, I appreciate everybody attending today, and you'll be hearing from us soon about our final recommendations. Thank you.